Cisco Stealthwatch. So let's have a walkthrough of Stealthwatch. We'll do it from a whiteboard perspective. I think that's will give better insight into the placement and areas of the network of how it's deployed to give you an idea. And from there's a couple of core use cases that Stealthwatch provides, right? And one is visibility, right? Understanding what normal looks like on the network. That's very important, right? Your security technologies may fail. And if they do, you're going to want to understand what might be happening that's different on the network than what normally happens. And even if an application's just deployed, right? So the services team deploys, our systems teams deploy new application, there's going to be changes to the network. We want to be able to identify them, right? Ultimately, once we're able to get visibility, then we can start detecting things. And based on that now, we can do response, right? So not only do we detect something's changed, we can now provide incident response. So when we look at the typical environment, right, we're going to keep this fairly simple. We've got the internet, we've got routers, we've got firewalls, right? You got core distribution layers, and then you have your access layer. And then as you move along, you'll have assets hanging off of that, right? And all of that is great. We have control points throughout the environment, specifically and more likely north-south, right? So things like the firewall upstream before you get out of the data center, maybe, or firewall before you go to the internet. You might have IPSs, etc. And that's all good. So that's north and south, but you don't have complete visibility north-south, right? You don't know everything that's happening. And east-west, right? As you get into the campus network, right? Host-to-host communication, whether you get into the virtual environment, right? The host-to-host communication, you probably don't have as much visibility as you'd like. So you'd want to cover, physical, virtual, and cloud. And how we do it is not deploy, agents all over the environment, but to use and leverage technologies that already exist. And that could be as simple as NetFlow, right? It provides metadata that we can look at, and we can make decisions based on that data. And it allows us to streamline the process in regards to the amount of data that we receive, right? So it's not complicated full packet capture in your entire environment. You need lots of storage to be able to contain that. There's lots of challenges that come with it. Now I'm going to talk about where we still do full packet capture in areas where you decide that it is important for forensic reasons. But NetFlow provides metadata and allows us to scale this solution out so we have visibility end-to-end, physical, virtual, and cloud in the entire environment. And NetFlow obviously provides the best visibility, right? S-Flow and J-Flow, those are other flows that are available, but a lot of times it's sampled, right? So you're not going to get as rich data out of that as you would out of NetFlow. And then there's IPFix, right? So IPFix is another flow data that we can consume as well. So all of these flows Stealthwatch can consume and make sense out of that data. Now, when it comes to detection, we have things like top hosts, top apps. We've got network performance. All of these are core areas of the network or core focus of the networking team, for example. I'm going to talk a little bit about the applications and network performance that provide the networking teams better insight, right, to help with troubleshooting, for example. Security, advanced persistent threats, bots, malware. We've got DDoS, data exfiltration. We have 0-day. At the end of the day, your security technologies will fail, right? It doesn't matter who you buy or purchase. It doesn't matter how integrated it is. There's going to be times of failure. And what does that mean to you? Well, that means that you have something in the environment that obviously you don't want there. But how are you ever going to know? And when will you know, right? So, for example, if a file gets in, it lands on a PC, and it starts doing SMB probes on port 445, talking to PC, would that be good to know? Absolutely, right? That'd be awesome to know. And we can take that information and run it in Stealthwatch, right? And say, well, wait a minute, SMB flow, PC to PC, that's not normal behavior of this asset, never was. And therefore now we can alert on it. And maybe something like WannaCry gets discovered. You've got things like compliance, right? PCI, SCADA, right? Internal audits, your own internal compliance, right? Or governance. At the end of the day, when it comes to audit time, and you have a PCI environment, the auditor comes in, says, well, how do you control this environment? Where are your controls? Can you provide me an output of your firewall rules and your ACLs? And I just want to validate that you are meeting the requirement. But at any time, you don't know throughout the year whether or not those controls have failed. So you get a point-in-time view. The auditor gets a point-in-time view. Sure, you might get visibility into change requests, but it doesn't mean that somebody didn't fat finger something, right? And type in something wrong. It just means that the change request on paper look great. Your outputs look fine, right? But again, it's very point in time. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to say, here's a collection of assets that fall under this compliance, whether that be something as simple as PCI, and any asset that ever tries to talk to that network, I get alerted, right? Or if it talks to those PCI devices, talk to something else, I get alerted. And then at any point in time, I can run a flow query against that environment to say that nothing should talk to the PCI environment. If it is, I want to see the flow record. If it comes back empty, that means throughout that period, could be a year, for example, I now can say, without a doubt, I know not only do we have the controls in place, but we also have validated that those controls have been working throughout the entire year. Pretty valuable. So actions. Now, once we detect something, what can we do? So you can do things like a null route on a router or shun on a firewall. But we can also integrate with Identity Services Engine. And this is where things get really interesting. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. So now what do we get essentially? So you've heard the term network as a sensor. So now your network becomes an entire sensor. Any traffic that passes any of these sensors, right, now is logged. Now I've got that cell phone record of everything that takes place. I get some behavioral analytics, so user and entity behavioral analysis. This is stuff that's invaluable. And then network as an enforcer. Why not use the network to start mitigating risk? Why do I always have to wait for a packet to go from the source all the way to the destination or almost to the destination to block it at a firewall upstream? It's already past my environment. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to shut it down at the point of entry? Or as close as possible? So when we look at Stealthwatch, what do you get? So you get a flow collector and a Stealthwatch manager. Those are two required elements. Everything else is extra, meaning that you could leverage it if you have the use case that warrants that, but you don't require it. You do require a flow collector and a Stealthwatch manager. And what you'll do is you'll go to your routers, your firewalls, and your switches, and you'll enable NetFlow, and you'll send NetFlow to the flow collector. And Stealthwatch is the brains behind it, right? It can run the flow queries. It's going to run the analysis. It's going to determine that there's data exfiltration that's taking place and fire off alerts. But you might have elements in your environment that don't support flow, right? And or an old version of a switch that doesn't generate flow. So what we can do is span a port to a port and send that to the flow sensor. Now the flow sensor will generate flow for you. So it'll generate net flow, send it to the flow collector. So that's really good. But the other thing it'll provide is now it gives you layer 7 visibility. So things like deep packet inspection. So applications, now I can see them. Round trip time, right, from client to server. How long did it take? That's good to know, especially for the networking teams. And then server response time. What does that mean, server response time? Well, everyone always says it's a network. And if you ask anybody that's ever been a network engineer or on the network, they'll tell you rarely it's ever the network, right? but it's always the network, meaning that people always point there, and the networking team is left scrambling to try to figure it out. Wouldn't it be nice if the networking team, or the application teams for that matter, had a portal that they can go to and look very quickly on a flow query and see that the round trip time was 220 milliseconds, right? The network typically performs at 20 milliseconds, but that's an assumption maybe. Fair enough. We do see that, but let's assume as an assumption. We will actually give you the server response time. So we'll say the packet was received by the server at X, so 21 milliseconds the server received it, and then it held it for that remainder of time. So now we know roughly the server held that packet for 200 milliseconds. And therefore, now we know the issue is with the server. What it is, we still don't know. We know it's got to the server and the server has held that response. But now at least the server and application teams are focused, right? They know that the issue lies with them, and now they can start investigating and ultimately solving the problem. Now that provides, top applications and network performance capabilities specifically for the networking team, which is invaluable. So what if we wanted to get packet capture? Well, we have a packet analyzer, and it's a 42 terabyte rolling buffer. So lots of storage there, but we're now able to do that packet capture. And what you're going to be able to do is, if you generate a flow query and it happens to be a flow query where we're capturing packets, right? You're going to be able to look at the entire payload. And so this could be strategically placed, maybe in the PCI environment, areas of high levels of security, for example. But it really can be deployed wherever you feel that it needs to be deployed. Ultimately, what this is going to allow you to do is not only pull that flow data, but also pull that full packet, and that can be used for forensics, for example. Again, it's optional. So as we move along here, what could we do now? Well, we can move over to the PC, and we have Anyconnect, right? So that's a product that Cisco sells that does, things like VPN. It does 802.1x. It's more of an advanced supplicant. It can be a catalyst for our Cisco AMP product and our Cisco Umbrella, so formerly OpenDNS. So it provides a more than just what people may have considered a VPN client. It's much, much, much more than that. So we've added an enhancement to it called the Network Visibility Module, and it uses IPFix. And this now, again, it's an agent typically already deployed, right? Now we're just adding that visibility module. And now what we're doing is we're sending IPFix data to the flow collector. And now what do we get? We get user, device, application, location, and destination information. Again, the more context that we have about an asset, the better we as analysts can ultimately solve the problem, right? Because we have context. We know, wait a minute, it's on a certain area of the network. It's coming in on this port. It's actually this user using this application, which might not be sanctioned, right? So again, the more information we have, the better capabilities we have when it comes to solving problems, whether that's technology or people. So let's continue going through this, right? Let's leverage, right? We're already leveraging NetFlow data that we've already owned. We have went out and bought Stealthwatch. We have bought the flow collector. Maybe we already have Identity Services Engine, right? We have a NAC-based offering that has guest access, right? BYOD. We can integrate it with things like AMP for endpoints. So if the disposition changes, we can do something. We can do vulnerability. We can get insight into vulnerability assessments that you may be doing with other products. So it's a product that you may already have. But what we can do now is tie this into Stealthwatch Management Center, right? This is where we start building an architecture, right? So we use something like PXGrid, and we share contextual data. We share that with Stealthwatch. We share that with third party. And we can also consume that data, right, from third party as well as Stealthwatch. So here what we get is ICE is going to provide, because it's going to know when you log in, it's going to know who you are. It's going to know what device you're connecting, because ICE has already done all that heavy lifting. So now we just share that. So now, instead of just looking at a NetFlow record with IP addresses, you're going to see a NetFlow record like you do, but you're also going to get context. You're going to know it's Jason, it's his iPhone, and the MAC address. Well, that's pretty cool, right? Again, more context, the better it is for us as analysts. But we can also share behavioral changes. So maybe this PC is exfiltrating data, right, out to the internet. Well, that's not good. Right? Maybe this individual is data hoarding from the data center and just hitting box to box and downloading data. Maybe it's malware. It doesn't really matter, right? We can share that behavior back with ICE. And then now what we can do is, on the fly, we can say, you know what? Based on this information, we're going to quarantine that asset. We're going to shut down the port. So we do a change of authorization. We flip the port. We shut it down. Whatever, right? We've now ultimately mitigated that risk, right? We've removed the threat. Now, we still might need to do analysis on that PC, right? Maybe it's malware, right? That's doing something bad. But at least we've contained that threat. Now, as we move along, I've quickly just removed all the flows that were coming in, because I want to show you another product. So say, for example, that you have SIM. And now you want NetFlow data to go to both SIM and the flow collector. Well, switches and routers may be limited to the number of devices it can export to. And if it's only one, now you're in a dilemma, because maybe you want data to both. So what we have is a UDP Director. It can be highly available as well. And now we send all the flow data to a single source. We centrally locate that data. That data then gets sent to wherever we want it sent to. So it's almost like a traffic cop, right? So it looks at the data and it says, oh, this data goes here and this data goes there, right? In this case, maybe we want all the data to go to the flow collector and all the data to go to the SIM. We can do that with the UDP Director. As we move along, we go to the cloud. Now this is where we can leverage Stealthwatch Cloud. So both public and private. It is agentless again. But for example, this could be AWS, right? And what we can do is we can take the VPC flow logs, and consume them and understand what's happening in the environment, both entity behavioral analytics, right? Insight into that flow. Now we have not only the enterprise covered, but also the cloud infrastructure that we might also be leveraging. So we don't have a gap. As we move along, we might want to add additional enhancements. So if you saw there, I've added the web proxy. The web proxy is going to provide URL insight, right? So great, we've got all this JSON, iPhone, Mac, and IP address, NetFlow data. We might have user device and application insight, and now we get the URL as well, right? If you have a proxy server, we're able to consume those proxy logs. Pretty cool, right? Again, all we have to do is look up that flow record, and fairly quickly we get an idea of what took place. So as we continue to move through here, there's one more piece, right? Cognitive threat analytics. So being able to, and I believe the term now is cognitive analytics, right? So it does more than just threat. But in this case, what we're going to look at is sharing that NetFlow and proxy telemetry data with Cognitive. And Cognitive has behavioral capabilities. It allows us to look at the threat landscape at greater scale. But the other really cool thing is, and if you have the proper switch infrastructure, you're also going to be able to extend NetFlow and which adds a couple new capabilities that we introduced for encrypted traffic analytics. So being able to look at traffic in your environment without having to decrypt it and determine whether or not it's bad, right? Pretty cool. Because if your security technologies fail and that asset gets compromised and it's malware and it's communicated through an encrypted channel, Well, the only way you're going to ever know about that is decrypting that payload and inspecting it. And there's all kinds of challenges that come with decrypting. You're still going to need to decrypt. I'm not going to say that we're going to eliminate it. But what I am saying is wouldn't it be nice if I can take that enhanced NetFlow data, leverage my Stealthwatch, so again, two things that I may already have, right? Use that enhanced data and now be able to determine whether or not something is in my environment that is bad, that is communicating through an encrypted channel without having to decrypt it. Pretty cool. So that's a little bit about Stealthwatch and pulling it all together. Some really cool stuff. This continues to grow. We keep adding additional features when we talk in cloud and Stealthwatch Enterprise. This is coming to get together very nicely. But the nice thing about this is, and as you guys continue to build out your security architecture, is that you must start building a end-to-end solution that's fully integrated as much as possible, right? We can't keep doing what we've done up to this point. It doesn't work. And this is one example of how Cisco can be effective leveraging everything in your environment from the network, endpoint, and cloud.